It's 5:30 on June 25th, 2025. I'll call this meeting of the Morton County Planning and Zoning Commission to order. Start off with a pledge of allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, roll call. Rohr.
Here.
Tomac.
Here.
Wald.
Here.
Zachmeyer.
Yes.
L.
Here.
Berger.
Here.
Braun.
Here.
Buckley.
Here.
Everyone is here. Okay, let's move on to approval of tonight's agenda.
Move to approve, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. All right, approval of the minutes from May 28th.
Motion to approve the minutes is submitted. Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. All right, Natalie, item number 1.
Our first item is the Pierce subdivision. This is in the northwest quarter of Section 6, Township 135 North, Range 81 West. This is located about a mile west of Highway 6 and 5 miles south of St. Anthony. So here's Highway 6. It's over here. The applicants are Keenan and Sierra Pierce. They are just looking to split off one residential lot, 1.57 acres, from this roughly half of that quarter. This would be the third buildable lot in that quarter. The nearest southwest water line is about a half mile away, so they're planning to do a well here. So they're doing 50 feet for access and utility easement jointly to reach that proposed lot, and then also serve the remainder of the half a quarter beyond that. Staff is recommending approval, and I can take any questions.
Any questions for Natalie?
So, Mr. Chairman, I have a question. Is that another, I'm sorry, is that another farmstead to the, what would it be?
To the south?
South?
Yes.
Southeast?
Are you talking about?
I'm looking at the aerial view, yeah, right there.
Kind of that, yeah. Yes, there was another one, and another one here too, I believe.
Oh, there's three going to be three right there.
Well, so these are existing.
Uh-huh.
This is, would be a new lot with nothing on it, but they're gonna put a home on it.
Okay.
So that's 3 so far in that quarter.
And they're all in that real short distance to each other, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions for Natalie? Okay, not seeing any. Go ahead and open the public hearing for this item. Is there anyone that would like to speak? Second call for the hearing. Third and final call. I'll close the hearing. Commissioners, your wishes?
Mr. Chairman, I would move to recommend approval of the final plat of the short form subdivision known as the Pierce subdivision and a zoning map amendment from agricultural to residential. as the subdivision conforms to the regulations established in Article 7 of the Morton County Land Use Code and conforms to the land use priorities established in the 2045 Comprehensive Plan.
Second.
Motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Item number 2.
Our next item is the Burghardt subdivision. This is in the northwest quarter of Section 12, Township 138 North, Range 83 West, located south of Lyons Road and about 5 miles south of Crown Butte Lake. The applicant is Devin Burghardt. There is an existing lot in this quarter that has a home on it. It was an auditor's lot, so it was non-conforming. This would be a new lot. So because they are so close, they are going to be part of the same subdivision, so bringing one lot into conformity and the other lot, making it new, for a total of 13.51 acres. So this would be an 80-foot utility and access easement to accommodate the Missouri West water line that is there, so giving more space for that. And then also to be able to access the remainder of that quarter. Because Missouri West Water, they did their hydraulic study and water will be available to serve the new lot and power as well. So these would create the second and third buildable lots in that quarter, which meets our standards in our comprehensive plan. Staff is recommending approval, and I can take any questions.
Questions for Natalie? Any questions? Okay, not seeing any. I will go ahead and open the public hearing. If there's anyone that would like to speak, go ahead and come up to the mic. Second call for the hearing. Third and final call, and I'll close the hearing. Ready for a motion?
I move to recommend approval of the final plot of the short zone subdivision known as Burghardt subdivision and a zoning map amendment from agricultural to residential as the subdivision conforms to the regulations established in Article 7 of the Morton County Land Use Code and conforms to land use priorities established in the 2045 Comprehensive Plan.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Item number 3.
Our next item is the second look that we get at the Stern Fifth subdivision. This is in the southwest quarter of Section 24, Township 139 North, Range 84 West, located about 1.75 miles southeast of Sweetbriar Lake. The applicants are Rick and Kathy Stern and a number of other applicants. This is 159.07 acres, essentially replatting this entire quarter section. The Stern Fourth subdivision was approved by County Commission on May 8th, just as a reminder. So all these residential lots are created already, and this was just the long form subdivision to pull it all together into one plat. Typically for a long form subdivision, we have a stormwater management plan. Because there was essentially nothing that was changing, county engineer gave a waiver for that stormwater plan. That would have been the only real difference that we would see between this final plat and the last preliminary plat. So that is the final plat. The dash line you see is the special flood hazard area. None of the newly created lots would be affected by in other words, they're not in that area. So with that, staff is recommending approval, and I can take any questions.
Questions for Natalie? These are really easy items so far, Natalie.
Oh, just wait.
Any questions? Okay, I'll go ahead and open the hearing. If there's anyone that would like to speak. Second call. Third and final call. Close the hearing. Ready for a motion.
I move to recommend approval of the final plat of the long-form subdivision known as Stern Fifth subdivision, as the subdivision conforms to the regulations established in Article 7 of the Morton County Land Use Code and conforms to the land use priorities established in the 2045 Comprehensive Plan.
Second.
Motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Our next item is the second look at the Goither Fourth subdivision. This is in the northwest quarter of Section 11, Township 135 North, Range 79 West, located in the town site of Fort Rice. The applicants are the Belials Trust and a number of other applicants. To refresh, there are 4 landowner groups that want to consolidate the very small lots that exist in Fort Rice and make those into conforming lots. And again, because essentially nothing is changing on the ground here, county engineer gave a stormwater management plan waiver for the subdivision. This has changed just slightly from your last look at it. The owner of these properties didn't want to have to adjust that approach. So the change was the right-of-way was going to be split in half between these 2 sets of properties, and instead that right-of-way would all go to that property owner. And from what I understand, the applicant group was comfortable with that change. As far as our concern would go, as long as everyone has access to their property, which they do, and as long as all of the lots are conforming, which they are, as long as that's satisfactory with all the landowners, I guess as staff, I don't have an issue with it, and would recommend approving this as it is. And I can take any questions.
Any questions for Natalie? Okay, I'll go ahead and open the hearing. Anyone that would like to speak? Second call. Third and final call. I'll close the hearing. Ready for motion.
I move to recommend approval of the final plat of the long-form subdivision known as Goither Fourth subdivision and a zoning map amendment from residential to commercial for Lot 2 only, as the subdivision conforms to the regulations established in Article 7 of the Morton County Land Use Code and conforms to the land use priorities established in the 2045 Comprehensive Plan.
Second.
Motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
So our next item is we titled it Air Capture and Concentration Standards, since the local government doesn't have any permitting authority for the actual sequestration. So the state's attorney's office thought that was probably best to leave that off. But known to the general public probably as CO2 capture and sequestration. So we had a subcommittee that was assigned by the county commission to pull together a preliminary draft of a land use code update to guide this land use in Morton County. We had, I don't know exactly how many, but quite a few meetings, long meetings, a lot of effort put forth by the subcommittee members, and also Dawn, thank you for being there, for collecting all that info on behalf of the neighbor group. And so hopefully we at least have something to start out with to facilitate good discussion. So I am going to just kind of hit the high points. It's 12 pages. They're all in your packet. As soon as the subcommittee was done with the draft, I put it out online so that people could look at it. So they've had a month to look at it online, and then it was in the packet on Friday. So, but I guess the high points that might be of most interest to the general public would be noise, for one. So the approach that we're using in this draft would be that any applicant who wants to apply for a facility like this would have to submit a plan to my office ahead of the application, and that plan would describe what approach they would use to establish ambient baseline noise level for the area that they're going to put that project in. So they would have to establish an ambient baseline noise level for sensitive receptors, meaning if it was a county park or if it was a public building or occupied residences, to establish what is the typical noise level of those areas. And then staff would review that. We'd just validate that the approach that they wanted to use is adequate. And then based on that information, they would have to go put noise reading equipment out in those areas, establish that ambient baseline noise level, and then when they submit their application, provide the information about what the ambient baseline noise level was, and then also provide a noise analysis that measures how much noise the project would produce and thresholds for within, so the thresholds would be 3 decibels. In the last application we looked at, the thresholds were 5 decibels. Those intervals would be smaller in their noise analysis. So that noise analysis would have to come with the application, and then we have defined acceptable thresholds for increase over ambient baseline noise level in our draft. So once that level's established, let's say the ambient noise was 38 decibels, an acceptable increase at a sensitive receptor like an occupied residence would be 3 decibels. That would be an acceptable increase. For public parks, public building, an acceptable increase over ambient baseline noise level would be 5 decibels, or at the property boundary of a non-participating landowner, that acceptable increase would be 7 decibels. That is what is in this draft. That's the approach to noise setbacks for the draft that the subcommittee came up with. And then as far as concerns about accidental release of CO2, the approach would be to have a model run for any type of release that could happen. That would be different depending on what equipment they might be using. And so they would have to have a third party run that model. And then we have thresholds for acceptable levels at certain sensitive receptors. So the setbacks would be So the model's gonna come up with an extent for how concentrated certain vapor clouds would get. And so it would assume the whole model for all of that released CO2 to get as far away from the release point as possible. And so you're gonna have areas that would be that 40,000 parts per million concentration. So whatever area that touches, it can't overlap with the property boundary of a non-participating landowner, an occupied dwelling, a park, church, etc. And that would be, oh, that's right, we didn't have a time threshold on that because that was just too concentrated. And then the dispersion area at 30,000 parts per million, dispersion, if it were longer than 10 minutes, it can't intersect with or overlap non-participating landowner, occupied dwelling, park, church, public building, etc. So I guess I should point out, the model is going to tell you, because it's different each time, the model will actually tell you what is the time interval that it took for this cloud to reach this concentration threshold. So the time might be different depending on your release, depending on the design of your facility. So if there are areas where after 7 hours it was still at a 5,000 parts per million concentration, then that project couldn't locate in an area where that would overlap with, again, these sensitive receptors. So that was the approach to accidental release of CO2 and the noise standards, which are probably the most, I mean, there's lots of concerns, but those were probably primary in the discussion. We do have standards for reclamation. Our approach was that the operator would need to provide a report about how much CO2 they sequestered on an annual basis. And if they did not provide that report to the county for 2 consecutive years, the county would consider that that facility is not operating, and we could call the reclamation bond on that project, and if the operator/developer didn't go reclaim the site on their own. So there was a lot more in here, but I'll leave it at that. Hopefully you all had a chance to look at it before the meeting, and I can certainly take questions if you had questions up front.
Any questions for Natalie?
Natalie, didn't we talk about at the committee that the noise study would maybe be done at different times of the year, just so that it's,
So,
or what did we, I remember we talked about that.
well, it is true that you're gonna get different readings at different times of the year. We didn't talk about that in the subcommittee discussions.
Okay, maybe I was something.
Yeah, but I got some feedback from a member of the public after I put out the first draft of this, and I thought it was a good point, so I just added it in, that measurement should not be taken during times when sources of noise that are not representative of typical ambient noise levels are generating noise, such as when machinery for planting or harvesting is in use. You know, so if you have something atypical going on, you can't measure during those times.
Because there could be a difference between winter, I'll say,
Yep,
and summer.
Right, yep. And I think, yeah, and that's weather dependent, wind dependent, and I think we can split hairs over that. I think, though, the applicant is probably going to choose a time, you know, that's convenient for them, and wind does blow. So I think in winter, the noise can travel farther, but it might be quieter, and then summer, it doesn't travel as far, but it might be noisier, you know, so I think you have offsetting factors.
Right.
And, yeah, they can study it a lot, or they can just pick a time and do it. So hopefully, you know, if people had concerns, they can bring that forward.
Other questions for Natalie?
Natalie, I do have a question on the total amount of CO2 projected to be sequestered. So is that just kind of like what, like say it's so many tons or parts per million or whatever?
Tons
Tons.
per year.
Per year, if they say whatever it is, and then eventually when it's running, are they supposed to like actually say what it actually is?
No, the whole point in asking for that metric is really just to give us a ballpark of how big of a project we're looking at. We don't have anything to do with how much they get to sequester underground. That's completely up to the Industrial Commission. It's just really more to give us an idea of what is the scale of the project that we're evaluating.
Got it.
But
Natalie, it is reported annually,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, the Industrial Commission has, and it's long reports that go to the Industrial Commission.
Anything else for Natalie?
And I guess what I will say is that the topic of solar was brought up. What happens if that is in conjunction with this type of application? And I do think that's a very valid point. We do need a solar ordinance, and I guess I would say if there's, as we go through this process, if there's a leaning towards that being the method of power that would be used, I do think that we should get our solar ordinance done to be ready to have alongside this. That would take a little more time, but I think that's a best way to go about it.
Anything else? Okay. I'll go ahead and open the hearing. Let's just ask everybody to try to keep comments to a relative minimum. That's vague, but I don't want to set a hard and fast rule. Let's just try to be respectful of everyone's time.
And I was going to say, if people have questions as they come up, some of them might repeat or be part of a discussion at the end. So I will keep track of those questions, and I'll try to answer them all together at the end. Okay.
Natalie, should we switch?
Oh, yes.
Mic is open. Just everyone who comes up, please state at least your name for the record.
Hi. I get nervous. I'm Lacey Knight, neighbor. I've talked to you guys before. Landowner, resident in rural Morton County. I'm here to just talk about the draft of the land use code. There were some pretty big concerns, but I have 4 tonight that I'd like to kind of highlight for you guys. I did submit an email 3.5 or 4 weeks ago, so that should be in your packet as well. So the biggest, and I'd like to start off, the first one is road safety. I do understand that you guys kind of have a set way that you go about with big projects, making sure that road safety during the construction phase of the project is addressed, and that that's not necessarily something that is typically included in the land use code.
That's correct.
That said, this project looks like it could be a massive undertaking for the county. And we live on a dirt road that 2 weeks ago, with all of that rain, 3 weeks ago, when we had, it's nearly impassable. I cannot stress that enough. And so the idea that the bus route, emergency services, my children who drive, are expected to use a road that is nearly impassable for the duration of years while this project is underway is not acceptable. And, you guys have the ability here to do something that is within your power. We have home rule. Once we pass this on, it is no longer Morton County that gets to make a majority of the decisions. And so I'm asking for creative ways to try to help solve that problem. If there is anything that we can do, and I don't know the land use code, but if there's some way that we can solve that, that would be good. The second issue that I have is setbacks. This draft includes a half-mile setback for substations and laydown yards, but this can be waived if landowners and residents sign off. Critically, there's no fixed setback for the DAC units themselves. Instead, it relies on vapor dispersion modeling. These models use thresholds like 5,000, 30,000, and 40,000 parts per million, as Natalie was saying, of CO2, and consider time to dispersion to determine safety zones. If dispersion is predicted to fall below those thresholds fast enough, the project could be approved, even if it's close to homes, churches, parks, and property lines. But those results depend entirely on the assumptions made in the modeling process. We were told by the applicant at the first meeting that they could not produce accurate models of dispersion. We were told they could not produce those. So the idea that now these companies are going to have the technology, this is brand new, this is experimental. To suddenly come up with these models and have them be accurate is, I don't think it's fair. So I think that other counties like Lincoln County, South Dakota, and Wyoming's Carbon Safe project use fixed non-waivable setbacks from project perimeters ranging from 1/4 of a mile to nearly a mile. Morton County should do the same. And that goes to non-participating parties, parks, and homes. My third point is, it kind of goes into that, is the data. DAC is still a very new, largely untested technology. Most of the data being used on safety, on noise, on emissions, even the vapor models themselves, are completely based on projections. They can be made up. And we've seen this before. We've seen companies do this. So they're based on projections. They're not based on independent peer-reviewed studies, which is what we need for science. If we want something like this, that they're claiming this is good science, then we need peer-reviewed studies that show that these models are real, not something that somebody decided. If these projections are wrong, the consequences will be costly and hard, or even impossible to fix. That's why we need third-party verification before any permits are granted. And I do know she had mentioned using third-party for the sound projections. I think it's important that there be safeguards in place, that the applicants cannot go in and pay somebody a bunch of money to get the sound projections that they want. So if there's a way that we can kind of safeguard that, I think it would be in Morton County's best interest. Finally, the cost. the Stratos DAC facility in Texas, which Retract LLC referenced at the beginning of this as a comparison model, what they wanted to do was like this DAC facility in Texas, started with a projected cost of $800 million. And it's already ballooned to $1.3 billion. It's being paid for with federal tax credits, Department of Energy grants, and private investments from BlackRock. That means we, the taxpayers, are funding it. If this project comes here, we talked about taxes before, and this is just a plug for that, but Morton County residents could end up bearing the burden for the damaged roads, strained infrastructure, and potential costs of restoring farmland if the project fails or the government changes directions. I know that there's some safeguards that have been talked about for reclamation in place, but if we are dependent on the U.S. government for funding for this project, and our government decides this is no longer in the U.S. government's best interest, what happens? I mean, that's a gigantic project. So the commission's job, this commission's job, or Planning and Zoning Committee's job is not just to greenlight development, it's to protect the safety and future of Morton County. So I respectfully ask for you to require enforceable road protections during construction, and that may need some creativity. I'm not sure what that looks like. Set fixed, non-waivable setbacks for all DAC infrastructure and the perimeter of the plume, underground plume. Require independent verification of all impact data, meaning they collect their data using who they choose, and we choose an independent source to look over their data. And then once again, put a really stringent financial and environmental exit plan in place prior to allowing a permit. Once we permit them, it's out of our hands in Morton County, and we no longer get to say what happens when this doesn't go well. So thank you guys for your time. Sorry I was a little jumbled there. I did have a question for Natalie. You talked about noise and you know, them bringing a model to you and then you making a determination on the validity of that model. And I guess my question is, what are you using as your basis for making that determination? Where is that data coming from? That may be something else that would be worth adding in there. So thank you. Appreciate it.
President Lacy, I have a question. One of your comments and suggestion has to be with some accountability reference to when the company presents models, presents data and stuff like that.
Yeah.
To have a secondary approach by having an independent review from an independent company or whatever it may be, do that. That'd be rather expensive, wouldn't it, for the county or whoever would have to pay for that?
I don't think that would be on the county. I think that needs to be on the applicant.
Well, it wouldn't be
I think
unlikely,
that-
though, an applicant, I mean, they're already paying for this, that they would go and pay somebody else to review what they've already submitted. That wouldn't be too likely, would it?
I wonder what counties have done in similar situations.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if that's something worth looking at. Okay, fantastic.
Yeah, my question
Yeah.
is, would they have an independent contractor do research to find out whether or not their information is valid?
Right.
I question that.
Yeah. I mean, you know, the scientific process means that we should be taking as many views as we can get on something, especially when it's as novel as it is. I mean, these don't exist. This is not the same as the wind turbines. That was technology that existed when it came to North Dakota. That was not brand new. I mean, the facility in Texas is still being built, and it's gone on and on and on and on. So I look at that and I think about the years of the destruction on the road and the years of uncertainty. This doesn't have a tangible product. It's relying on our government to fund it. So what happens when those winds change?
Thanks, Lacey.
My name is Dawn Shepherd, and I did submit my concerns, comments to Natalie. Lacey addressed quite a few of them. Others that have not been mentioned yet tonight by Natalie or Lacey. Starting out, the title of the section, it just says that it is air capture and concentration. I feel that we are definitively zoning in on direct air capture, and that's what the moratorium was for, was direct air carbon capture. So I think the title of the section should be something that includes that, such as CO2 direct air capture facilities, or direct air carbon capture facilities, but I believe and feel that it is very important that we include CO2 or carbon capture in the title of this. And going further down into the applicability of it or the definition of it, I believe that is totally inaccurate the way it is stated currently. Again, this is for direct air capture, and all of these standards are for that. And so the definition has to reflect that. I included a page of about a half a dozen sources and their definitions of direct air capture, starting with the IRS, because if people are going to be obtaining 45Q tax credits for this, the IRS requires that the definition and what they are doing and using is subject to the paragraph, and it says the term direct air capture facility means any facility which uses carbon capture equipment to capture carbon dioxide directly from the ambient air. And that isn't what the current definition in the rough draft stipulates. And basically, just about everyone I looked at says that the definition needs to have 4 basic concepts. 1, the facility captures CO2. 2, it captures it directly from the ambient air or atmosphere. 3, it separates the captured carbon from the air. And 4, it captures it for sequestration or some other use. So I did give a summary of something that it should be similar, like applicability, a facility including all of its structures and equipment that uses mechanical processes and absorbents to extract and separate CO2 directly from the ambient air, which is to be used for sequestration or other uses, unlike carbon capture, which generally carries out at the point of emissions. That is the big difference between regular carbon capture and direct air capture, is that direct air capture is capturing CO2 out of the ambient air or the atmosphere, whereas regular carbon capture and sequestration is done at the point of the source, such as the flues, the smokestacks. And I think it needs to make sure that our definition reflects that. Next, there was discussion about the section where they are required to give us an estimated amount of how much pore space they are going to use and how much CO2 they expect to capture and sequester. My question is, we should also ask what method they are using to determine that. Because, for instance, Lacey talked about one in Texas that is, the cost is massive compared to what they thought it was going to be. Well, I'm going to talk about Climeworks, which is one that the previous applicant had said they were hoping to partner with them eventually. And Climeworks has the largest CO2 facility. They just built one in Iceland. And they were bragging about how they were going to capture 1 million tons of CO2 every year and sequester it. Well, they've been running now for a couple of years, and they've managed to capture less than 1,000 tons. And most of that was capturing what they emitted from their facility and what they were, the CO2 they were creating from the pollution. So if an applicant is going to say we're going to capture 1,000 tons a year, I think we need to know how they came to that determination. The planning and zoning is in charge of, is this an appropriate site for any project when you're looking at permits, applications, And when you look at the 2045 comprehensive plan, it states that in evaluating criteria for special use permits, the proposed use should be inextricably linked to or dependent upon the proposed location. And in the Morton County Land Use Codes for special use permits, the approval criteria states the proposed use shall not adversely affect the health and safety of the public, the workers, residents, or farming in the area. The Morton County Land Use Code under agricultural and district regulations states that they should encourage diversity by providing a wider variety of land uses, but the strict regulations should apply. They should not permit anything that would cause, that they should discourage any use which, because of the character, size, or location, would interfere with existing agricultural uses, create a nuisance for existing rural residents, or create a negative environmental impact. So my suggestion, and what I feel is important, is before we allow someone to destroy the beautiful landscape of the agricultural community and spend billions of their money and taxpayer dollars mixed in with that to sequester things and to say they're going to capture carbon, is that a measurement should be required to be taken in that area. How much CO2 is really in that atmosphere? How much CO2 is in the ambient air in that location? They said like somebody had done measurements in the Grand Canyon, which is something like 1.2 billion cubic centimeters. It's like only 1,200 tons of CO2 exists in an area that massive and that large. So before something is permitted that would destroy roads, neighborhoods, cost taxpayers billions of dollars, I think that it should be tested to see, is this an applicable location? Because if it doesn't have an overabundance of CO2 in the air, crops need CO2, plants need CO2, livestock, animals, human beings need a certain level of CO2 in order to survive and to live. And if the level in that area is already lower than that and they're going to take more out, it is going to create a negative environmental impact. It is going to harm the farming community. It is going to harm the residents. So that is, to me, a very important issue. Another one is that sometimes, like in our instance, there is an oil pipeline running underneath the property that is being leased that is going to be used for sequestration or construction. And I think it should be part of the application that they also include a statement from that it is okay, like say from DAPL, there's a DAPL pipeline that runs underneath there, and they've contacted the owner of the DAPL pipeline who is leasing that land or maybe giving a payment to the landowners already, that they have been made aware that this new facility is going to go atop of there, that there's going to be sequestration of CO2, or they're planning on it, and make sure that that company is aware of it in case it could cause damage to their pipeline or their property that is already underneath that ground, and that they are okay with it or they're not okay with it. And I think that should also be a requirement on the application, that if there is already existing leases with other pipelines, these companies who own those other pipelines has been made aware and are either okay with it or not. And I guess then the other major thing, I guess, goes along with the measuring of the CO2 is an environmental impact study. I know there was something where they would go around before and prior to construction and take measurements and take an inventory of the biodiversity in the area and the animals and the birds and everything there. But what kind of, like I said, the standards already say that it cannot create a negative impact on the environment, so they need to show us with an environmental impact study that it's not going to do that. So I believe that should be a part of the application. And just as someone who, is looking at living right next door to the property where the sequestration is going to be from prior applications, I think those non-participating landowners that could be directed or be affected directly because they are so close should know who's going to be liable if there is CO2 release, like say when they're sequestering it, or when they're separating the carbon out and the absorbents that oftentimes are toxic travel in the wind and can kill our grass, can kill our livestock. Who's going to be liable for that? The people that have leases with the CO2 or the direct air capture companies, you know, it states in their lease and their contract who's liable and who's responsible if these things happen or if any pollution is found. But who is responsible, or if there's a fire on the place and it gets off the property, off the facility, and it travels to our neighboring pasture, if there's a wildfire, who is responsible for our loss, who is liable for that expense? It doesn't tell us anything. We would have no idea. And if any of that, you know, there's a lot of insurance companies in North and South Dakota that are refusing to insure any damages that are done from toxins that spread onto the properties because of CO2, because at this point, many of them just consider CO2 a pollutant. So we just would like some reassurance that if our property is damaged, if there's a loss because of something that happens at this facility out in the middle of an agricultural area, that we need to know who's liable for the expenses and the costs and the losses. So those are, any questions?
Any questions for Don? Thanks, Don.
Thanks.
My name is Lyle Pels. I guess I'm not going to direct my comments to this particular site, although I've got property that lays against that, and they had never contacted me for core space or anything. And I think that there should be a certain mile diameter around a site like this that they need to have the core space before they can get a permit. And if these projects work, that they take the carbon out of the air, are they going to reimburse the landowners that farm in that area for the crop loss they have? Because if we take our carbon down, our yields are going to go down. Just like when we get the smoke in from these fires, generally speaking, our yields go up because we got more carbon in the air. That's my biggest concern. And I'm not just talking because this particular project laid right against me. I think it's for the whole county. Anybody that farms in the county, if this project goes in south of Gonowan or down by Elmont, there's going to be landowners affected if this works to take the carbon out of the air. Thank you.
Thanks, Lyle.
Eric Schultz, Morton County. I have a question as to why are we proceeding down the road with carbon capture at all in providing this thing? You don't have to answer me right now. This is a question that I have simply because of all of the issues that go along with this and the things that have gone on in the past here. And we've looked at that, and we've talked about it and shut some things down. I know that none of you are willing to have one of these facilities put in the property right next to where you live, right next to your house. You would up and move away just because of the chance that you might end up dying. And I know that the guys that build this stuff aren't building it in their neighborhood either. They're way up here in North Dakota building this stuff and all of that. So this is a big concern for me because it is dangerous, okay? Other than that, when we start looking at what's going on in our federal government and everything else, and I'm sure you guys stay well informed on all of that, and you look at the things that are going on, and we even have Kevin Kramer balking against supposedly one big beautiful bill because it's cutting out all the tax credits to projects like this. So there won't be any public funding for projects like this. And how that all plays out to us and what goes on and our county and everything is, I think, something that we definitely need to look at, because they start a project, they lose their funding, they can't afford to pay it. What happens with everything? How do you take account for that sort of stuff? Is there something in this plan that you're putting together here that's going to take into account for that? The other thing that I think about when I look at this stuff is, why is it our job to pay for all of this stuff? Why isn't it put over onto the people that want to build it? You know, you look on Elon Musk building that SpaceX missile to travel in space. He's not going getting public funding to build that. He's building it on his own. We have NASA, and we built a lot of rockets through the federal government for NASA and stuff, and they've shut down a lot of that stuff, and it's now private, done privately. And in so doing, what's to stop us, you guys, from putting into this thing that you will have your own independent people do it, that is going to be paid for by the applicant? We have our own forensic laboratory when we have crimes and stuff like that. We have our own health department to look into stuff. We have CDC to look into stuff and everything like that. Why can't we do the same thing and require them to pay for the cost of us to do the analysis on it? You know, to get in to look at it. Whether you hire a firm that you all agree on is going to work for you and not them, and provide that information back to you. You know, it doesn't mean that we have to have a new department or anything like that. You can go out and find the best people that know this and understand this, and get the viewpoints from a lot of different people on doing this, and require them to fund it up front so that you have the information, not from them, not from their people, because I know how all that works. I worked in the aerospace industry, and you always find the people that are most favorable for you, and you submit that stuff into the government so it looks good. I'm just wondering if that's something that you guys would consider doing as well. You know, it's something to look at other than what we've always done in the past, and relying on them to provide us the information that is going to help us understand what we're going to do, how it's going to affect us, how it's going to affect the people that you represent, you know, that have put you into office and everything. You know, we're the ones all sitting out here, and we put you here to help look out for the best interests of Morton County. And I guess this is just a suggestion that I have. It doesn't mean you have to run with it or anything, but it's something for you to think about, you know. So, appreciate your time.
Mr. Chairman, Eric, I just want to comment one thing. Your beginning of your talk, you kind of suggested, why are you going down the road? Well, we didn't ask that to come to us. Carbon capture or any other projects out there, they come to us. We're not out there, oh, you know, would you be interested in coming to Morton County for carbon capture? No, we don't do that. It comes to us, and by coming to us, then that's when we have to research it as a group up here. That's where we have to get input from the people and find out whether or not these people come in and have some authority, whether they're actually fallible or infallible, or whether they have credential. I mean, and we do have to take that apart then to protect what's in the best interest of the people of Morton County. But we don't go out and look for that stuff.
Right. I understand that they come to you. But if you look at Slope, I think it's Slope County in North Dakota here, and I don't know if you guys looked at any of their stuff. They don't have any windmills, they don't have any carbon capture coming in, they don't have any of these green energy things coming in because of the way they set up their structure for their county on what things are required and stuff up front. The payment of certain things up front and everything. And I believe it's Slope County. I can't be for sure, but it's over on the western side, down in that area, down in there. And maybe you would want to have somebody call them and ask them the same questions. You know, what have you guys done to look at this so that they aren't just running up here and saying, oh, this is an easy county to get into. All we have to do is step in and say, put in our application and we're in and we're going and we're building something, and we don't have to follow all this other stuff. I don't know what all they do, but I know that down there, they don't have any of this because they aren't willing to step up and abide by what they have said, what they've put in place. Anything else?
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you.
Hi. I'm Melissa Freeze. Again, I'm back. Just a couple things, and I'm more on the end of like, I'm worried about this project just because there's so much unknown. I live out in the country with my family, our herd, our animals, everything, my neighbors. My mom and dad live down the hill from us. They're in their 80s. We help take care of them. We've been out there for quite a few years. I was raised out there. But the unknown scares the living crap out of me. It really does. Because when something goes south, how do we fix that? When people are dead or sick, or how do we fix that? I mean, how do you live with that? How do you fix that? And like Eric said, you guys wouldn't want it in your backyard either. I don't think you would, but this is literally 2 miles from us. So I'll drive by it every day. I'll see it every day. I have a young daughter that'll be part of it. I just feel like I'm not against these people getting rich off of this, or I know it is our taxpayers' money, so I am a little bit against that, a lot of it, but go somewhere else where we're not living. Like, it just, to me, it seems insane to put this plant in the middle of a beautiful neighborhood, agricultural neighborhood, and tear the roads up, and I gotta go to sleep at night wondering, is something gonna happen while I'm sleeping? And I've done a little bit more research on it, more and more all the time, but I've heard that, like, so the carbon is dense, so it goes down, pushes the oxygen up. How do we get out of there if something happens? I just think about that all the time. How do we get out of there? How do I get my mom and dad in the car? How do we get out of there? Well, you can't drive a car, that's right, because you need oxygen. But just some things that go through my head. So that's all I want to say. I don't want that happening in our yard. Just, it scares the crap out of me, and I'm done. Thank you.
Thanks, Melissa.
Yep.
In light of both what Eric and Melissa were talking about as far as the dangers, and I know there's supposed to be an emergency plan that they have to submit, and and I'd ask Natalie, what's the order of how things, does the public get input when, our local firefighters and emergency management are working and reviewing emergency plans that an applicant would submit? I really think part of that emergency plan, and I don't know if the planning and zoning can require that in the land use, or if that just goes to the emergency management. I really think it needs to include, what is the escape plan for people? How are they going to ensure people? How are they going to notify people if there's a CO2 release and a leak? How are they going to notify people? How are they going to get them out of there? How are they going to rescue them? I think that they need to have a CO2 emergency escape plan when the CO2 escapes off-site. Thank you.
Thanks, Don. All right, anyone else that would like to speak?
I'm Dal Hitchcock, and I've always had one thing on my mind. When Retract was here, I visited with their attorney, and I said, you know, it's almost ridiculous, this program, because you got 0.04% of CO2 in the atmosphere. You need 0.02% in order for livestock, in order for crops to replenish. And the thing about it is, and basically you're pulling that out of the atmosphere, and what's that going to do to the crops? What's that going to do to the livestock? And you know what that attorney said to me? He said, oh, the minute you pull that CO2 out of the atmosphere, put it into the ground, it replenishes itself again in the atmosphere. And I said, well, then why are you doing it? He looked down, never answered. Now, what kind of research has this company done to say that the minute you put that CO2 into the ground, it replenishes itself again? It makes absolutely no sense to me. Does it make sense to you folks? Why ruin a beautiful community like what we have? And as far as people have said up here a few minutes ago that none of you folks would want this next to your property. But I tell you, the thing about it is none of us want it that live here either. We got our kids, we got our grandkids, we got our livestock, we've got our beautiful farms and so on and so forth. The only people that's benefited on that is Retract and people over here that don't even live in the community anymore, just drawing money out of the government. Thank you.
Thanks, Del. Anyone else that would like to speak?
My name is Ron Goppert. I'm a landowner. My family owns land there. And I think this project is a good project. It's going to be a safe project because you guys all done the research, make the rules. And as far as why it's being done, I think this is something I haven't heard too much talk about, is for every ton that goes into the ground, it offsets a ton that's going up into the atmosphere. And in North Dakota, we have the power plants, we have the coal mines, but there's people, there's a lot of people in this country. It don't make no difference if you believe about climate change or not, but there's some very important people, and a lot of them, and they have a lot of power, and they want to get rid of fossil fuels. And the number one that they want to get rid of is coal. And if we lose our coal mines, we are going to be in trouble, big trouble. And I think there's some people here that are protesting this that even work in that industry, and they should maybe think about that a little bit. So I guess that's all I got. Thank you.
Thanks. And I think we're almost through the public comment, but I do want to make the point that the hearing tonight is on the policy regarding carbon capture, and adopting a policy, forming a policy does not necessarily mean that any of us are in favor or against it. I think we have policies on junk yards and salvage yards. I'm not in favor of those things, certainly not in my backyard, but we need policies. So I just want to make that point that what's in front of us tonight really, of course, was triggered by the Retract project, but it's not directly applicable only to that. So, any other comment? If there's anyone online, looks like we have possibly two. Anybody online that would like to speak, you can just take yourself off off of mute anytime and speak up. Okay. I will do a final call for the public hearing. And I'll close the hearing. Thanks, everybody.
So, Mr. Chairman, I would say, I wanted to address some of the questions that came up. So, certainly this board, staff, we don't make a referendum on the validity of any land use. Just the fact that if there is a land use that someone can use their property for, a jurisdiction can't make regulations that completely forbid that land use. One of the most litigated land uses that has established this is adult entertainment. I don't think anyone wants that next to their house either, but it's been very well established. You cannot regulate it away. You have to have a location for it in your jurisdiction. Same thing with this, same thing with any other land use. So we can't just say, it doesn't belong here. We can't make regulations like that. So we have to accommodate this land use like any other land use. So we need to make clear policies and expectations for how it is shaped. So that's the first thing. So then our job is to find a balance, because you can't make regulations that are so stringent that it effectively regulates this land use away and makes it impossible for it to locate. You can't do that either. So if you have regulations that are so stringent, you also can, face lawsuits for that being the case. So we're trying to set standards, also not make it impossible, make it attainable. So with that said, I heard Lacey commenting about you would rather have a static distance. For people who are here, who want to have an opinion, if you could just raise your hand, who is more comfortable with a static setback distance? So like, forget the noise use or the noise analysis. Forget that. Don't do a noise use analysis or plume analysis. Just have a distance. Who likes a static distance?
I'd like to clarify. I was not necessarily saying a static distance excluding the noise use and the plume.
In addition to.
In addition to.
Okay, and I guess that's a tough one. What would that distance be? I think you said a mile.
I think, the carbon, the stuff that they've done in Wyoming is a mile.
Mm-hmm. And Williston is a mile for their data centers, which is similar, or sorry, Williams County.
They do not allow landowners to sign off and say, if it's an occupied residence,
Mm-hmm.
that excludes it.
Mm-hmm. And I guess maybe by show of hands, who likes a mile? Who likes that distance?
I'm still not clear on what we mean.
So they have set setbacks, as opposed to something that moves based on models. Their setbacks are based on, so.
You're talking the paper.
So I guess I want to get away from off mic talk, just for the record. If we're gonna, no, it's not your fault. If we think that we're out of the public hearing.
That's true.
I don't
We're
necessarily
not out
want to
of it.
open
We're
that
not out
up,
of it, are
but
we?
like if there are specific questions, no, we are out of the hearing.
Oh, did
right?
you close it?
I did close it.
Okay, got it.
So, I mean, I think if there are specific questions, we do have everybody in the room. I'm okay with that. Let's just try not to get on a tangent, and
Yep.
if we're going to do it, let's work with the microphone
Yep,
so
and
that if anybody
You
watches
need to
it.
come to the mic, Natalie, if you're addressing them as questions.
Yep.
Because it's being recorded and
Yes.
it's for them to hear
Yep.
it.
Okay, so, I know that other jurisdictions I've talked to, they don't like the noise analysis approach because it's so gray and flimsy, and they really like that static distance. Based on feedback we got during the application process, from many in this room, the static distance didn't sound like that was really a favorable approach for this group. And so we were trying to be more nuanced and say, okay, let's base it on the actual noise the thing is going to produce and make it a little more flexible. So I guess in the interest of not having a back and forth, if people can email me with your preferences, like what you think a reasonable distance would be, what relationship that distance has to the outcomes of a noise model, that would be helpful to email that to me. So, okay, so enough about that part. As far as the definition of what a title should include, IRS requirements are what they are. Those have no bearing on what a locality might call something. They're going to make their own definitions about what they're going to cover or not cover. And for our part, what if a company wants to sequester nitrogen from the air? We wanted to leave it a little more open so that who knows what technologies come down the pike. And also the idea that you may want to bring it from offsite. You may want to bring it from some other location on a truck and pump it into the ground in Morton County. So we want to cover that too. So that's why this was a little more broad. So sounds like there's a lot of concern about decommissioning. Maybe we need to look at that some more and think about what does a decommissioning look like if, federal funding gets pulled in the middle of construction.
So Natalie, I guess I'm just going to jump in on this one because this is one I wanted to talk about because I thought we had talked about this and I want to make sure I'm understanding it. So at the end of the policy, we do have the requirement for the reclamation bond at 200% of
engineer's
cost estimate at the time of construction.
Yep.
So it's been my understanding that that would be in place prior to the ground being broken. So
That's
if
true.
funds went away
That's true.
mid-construction,
It's already in there.
anytime in the future,
That's true.
we would have hopefully
We
more
already
than
have it
enough
there.
to restore it.
Yep. One thing that we didn't have in here that I listen to webinars all the time, like a kind of new thought on that too is that maybe you reassess every 5 years because inflation happens. That might be something we want to add in here, that it's like you're going to reassess that bond amount every 5 years just to make sure it's in line with what's realistic. So I might add that in. Okay.
So I think, Natalie, we don't have to get into the weeds of that, but
Yeah.
I guess I don't know the challenges once you're in it to ask the operator to increase the bond, right? So I know that's why I gave the recommendation of 200%.
Right. Because hopefully you're covering yourself.
But we should re-explore if that's the right amount.
Right. Yes. Okay. So further discussion on that. Yeah, the environmental impacts, that is really very difficult. We have state agencies that specifically deal with emissions, deal with stormwater or runoff, industrial outputs. And, their jurisdiction versus our jurisdiction. I know that there's some environments in which we don't get to overview or have a purview on those, that it's the state that does that. This is very difficult because it's a new use, and I think those roles are not necessarily clearly defined. So maybe some further discussions with DEQ about how they would recommend addressing this. They usually say, we'll handle it, don't worry about it, because we have our, that's usually their response, but I think this deserves another discussion.
And Natalie, here we're talking environmental impacts. In general.
Right, like, I think, Dawn, you were talking about how they scrub, right? Get your, whatever your chemicals are that you, yeah. And that's supposed to be accounted for in their plan, you know, how they intend to deal with those. And then that gets submitted to DEQ and they're supposed to evaluate the plan. You know, then it's, of course, are you following your plan? Was that a valid plan? And that is supposed to be DEQ's responsibility to, you know, if there's any runoff that would be leaving the site, that's what they deal with. Or sorry, not leaving the site, that would be if it's stormwater leaving the site, but just industrial outputs for like liquid outputs, air outputs, that's what they deal with and they're supposed to evaluate that. So that's a DEQ function, yeah. Lyle was talking about there should be minimum required buffer area around the reservoir. We cannot require anything having to do with below ground, like with the reservoir. We don't get to police that. We can only police above ground components of the project. So that is just a state. That's the environment, that regulatory environment that we are operating in. So I think there was a question about, you know, what if it doesn't get used? It would be the same type of question. Okay, let's say you're permitting a really big mall or Walmart or whatever, and you know, here we're permitting something based on the anticipated impacts. If nobody goes to shop there, if there's no traffic, if it closes down because we don't have the economic activity that we anticipated, we can't predict that that's going to happen. We have to just look at what would the impacts be if this is operating at full capacity. That's all we can evaluate. So as far as third-party verification of models, that is an idea, you know, that you charge an in-lieu fee and basically the applicant doesn't run the model at all. We would have to do, I mean, it's a significant cost. I think we would have to do some kind of RFP, and that's going to be a long application process to estimate cost, assign a party to do that, and have the applicant pay for it as opposed to them paying for it on their own. I think that could be possible. That's going to be a lot of steps. We could discuss that some more. I think that would be very atypical, but we can look at that.
I guess we can talk through these as we go. I think I like the idea. I think it's something we should explore. I think there are ways that it could be reasonably funded or accounted for at the onset of a project. I don't know that it's that unusual for entities to have consultants. Usually they're not, you would be going out for an RFP each time you do that proactively.
Which wouldn't be that often.
It wouldn't be that often, right? But I mean, we're also not going to have dozens of these coming in.
That's what I'm saying.
Right.
Yeah,
so
that's the plus side of it.
Whether it's you sort of find somebody that you use for the one or two of these or ongoing tests, I just think like it's something like we should look at.
Yeah.
I agree with the potential biases that can affect the outcomes of those studies. So
yeah, I guess what I would say is I would definitely choose that method or the applicant doing their own work. I would say it's not reasonable to do both. To tell them to put a study together and then have another verification on our side, I think that would be overly redundant. I think it's either you charge the in-lieu fee and then do it yourself.
So I think this is not carbon capture specific talk, but I think maybe most commonly what would happen is the applicant would hire a consultant to prepare a study. The third party role would be reviewing that for potential biases and making sure that they concur with everything. That brings the costs down from that third party side, but still hopefully gets that independent verification. Because I do also think that it may be challenging to have a third party do all of that. You sort of need the applicant or the owner to provide so much information.
I mean, the logistics of getting all that info to a third party to put in a model is gonna be
Right.
very
So
cumbersome.
I'm viewing it more as a third-party review that the county doesn't have the expertise for.
Right, a validation process as opposed to a full study.
Yeah, essentially. I don't know if that
So
meets.
from your perspective, you think that would be a reasonable ask in terms of logistics?
That's how I'm envisioning it, just based on other processes, like on a much simpler level, a stormwater plan. When those get complicated, often municipalities or counties have a consultant that doesn't go develop their own plan for a site. They just review what was provided and provide comments and what they're looking out for the best interests of the public in that review.
Because I mean, off topic, but I think that would definitely be necessary for solar, like
Sure.
stormwater, that can be huge stormwater,
Certainly.
and would need a third-party review for that, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know if what I'm thinking matches the expectations of the comments that were made, but that's how I envision
Like
it
have
as
them
being
do their
possible.
analysis and then third-party review just to validate that it looks, okay. All right.
I think certainly with that, it gets more feasible and, yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and I wanted to speak to the road safety situation. So I spoke to our county engineer. He wasn't here when we did Oliver 3, but he was here when we did the Glen Ellen Wind project. And we don't have a protocol for, here's a public process, here's, our criteria that we hit because every project is different. That basically, and the county, so I just want to address the comment that once this goes into a policy, the county doesn't have any leverage anymore in terms of the roads. We do have leverage. When we put a road use agreement together, there are criteria in there that the operator needs to maintain the roads in a certain condition. If there are hazardous, you can't see over a hill type of thing, to have flaggers out there during construction, those are all things that we can ask for and put in the road use agreement. And because it's different every time, I think it's very difficult to put those criteria into the land use code. But we do require that road use agreement, and that the highway department and the county engineer, road superintendent have the latitude to put many criteria in that road use agreement. So during the public process for any application that would come through, the help that we can get from the community is to be a part of that application review and public hearing, so that when this specific site plan comes forward, members of the community who live in that area can say, here are things that we think are very concerning about this specific site plan in this specific area, make those known so that staff can bring those to the highway department so that they can know about these concerns when they're putting the road use agreement together. So that's the help that we would ask for from the community at the application review phase here at P&Z to bring those concerns forward at that time about the roads. That would be very helpful. And I think that was most of what I had for questions and notes.
Follow up with a question, quick, Natalie. Don had a comment about an emergency action
Yes.
plan.
Yes.
Can you remind me, is that something that we touch on?
So I think, can I ask Patrick to come up and talk about, so I know we had a very detailed emergency response plan from the applicant last time. And I guess the expectation from emergency management in terms of specific homes, specific evacuation plan, like what is the level, the granular level that we get to with that type of emergency plan?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I guess I would begin by saying that the Office of Emergency Management would encourage a public review of that emergency plan. And just off the top of my head, there's a lot of things that would go into maybe an evacuation plan, for instance, right? we'd have to take a look at the terrain and the substances that we're dealing with. But to have a plan in place that is effective, and you know, the notification platforms that we use in the county, Code Red, we can, and iPause, we have that capability as well. For those that are not aware, iPause is where we can send out a notification to all residents in the county, or we can make a geographical map to a certain area, and that notification will go out to all cell phones in that area. And we can give direction and all of those type of things with that notification. And it's immediate. You know, I would say the whole process, once we get the information that needs to go out, I would say within 15 minutes we can get that notification out to the public. But yes, I mean, those are definitely things that I think, you know, from our perspective, from the Office of Emergency Management, that the public should have access to and input on. I would encourage that. I don't know if that answers that portion of what we were looking for.
I guess. I mean, that's a big part of the plan, for
Yeah.
notifying people of the evacuation.
Yeah.
So that the community understands and is explaining, and you can required to meet with the community and say, you know, here would be the route you want to take, like this or that, or.
Yeah, and
what,
there's
you
so.
know, if mass out, you know, how we prepare for it, how we get out of it, what we do.
Yeah.
You know, farmers aren't good about leaving their animals behind in emergency.
Right, and then there's so many things that you, as in emergency management, that we look at, and you know, I just don't want to take a lot of time here in saying, but you know, we could take a look at terrain and the substances that we're dealing with, and what is the most likely flow of a release and things like that. And part of our responsibility too in the Office of Emergency Management is to be in the community and talking to homeowners within that area and education, right? And ensuring that people are signed up for notifications and things like that. So I don't see that as a burden for the county or for the Office of Emergency Management to do those things.
So maybe the one thing I want to make sure I understand, and I don't know, this might be Natalie or you, Patrick. So to what extent is this mandated in the process? I mean, is it, yeah, maybe touch on that.
Right, so we do make it a requirement that it's one of the application materials. The applicant has to provide an emergency management plan and give Office of Emergency Management time to review it. Let's see, how long? 30 days, yeah. That basically, they have to provide that plan in advance of our official application date, because we don't have, must be submitted 30 days in advance of the application deadline. Yeah, so a full month in advance of when the rest of the materials have to come in, so that Patrick and his team have time to review it. And in that time would have, you know, if they have major concerns, be like, okay, here, fix this before you even submit it with the rest of the application materials. So.
Thanks.
Yep. Thank you.
Anyone have questions for Natalie? General comments on the policy?
Well, it looks like the committee still has some work to do.
I had some questions.
Do you want to
talk about the definition? again?
Definition of use?
Yeah.
Hang on, so what do we,
Well, she had answered it, and I guess I just still had some concerns.
You have a
about the
follow-up on-
explanation of it.
okay, on the, Really brief, Don. Just because we're here talking about it, I guess let's get the direction, but.
Okay, so I have a real problem with it not including direct air capture. You said something about, well, it could capture nitrogen or something in the future. Okay, but this moratorium and this land use code and all of these direct air capture subcommittee meetings were directed at direct air carbon capture facilities. That's what all of us have done our research on, that's what we've been preparing for, that's what we've been directing all the necessities for, and all of a sudden we're talking about, well, maybe it'll be nitrogen, maybe it'll be something else. We don't know what any of that is. We don't know how similar, how different it is from carbon capture. And I go back to this title of this section needs to be direct air capture facilities only, and the definition needs to stress whether it's from the Department of Energy, Department of IRS, the Environmental and Energy Research Council in Grand Forks stipulates direct air capture facilities. The new one that we put the moratorium on was a nascent technology for collecting carbon. It's a carbon capture technology and nothing else. And I think we need to stick with this in these land use codes. And if you want to stretch it out into other capture of other kinds, then it needs to go under a different section or as a subsection of this, that if it is this, it's that. But this is supposed to be direct air carbon capture land use codes. And if you're going to start changing it midstream, a lot of people are going to be very upset about this because this is what we've been working on and spending our time researching and preparing for. I don't know anything about nitrogen capture. I've never even heard of it. I don't know if, yeah, I'm just saying, so I believe our definition and section title needs to be specific to direct air carbon capture, and that all these land use codes are directed toward carbon capture from the atmosphere because that's what direct air capture is.
Thanks, Tom. Okay, Natalie, you want to just touch on that, I guess, briefly one more time?
Yeah, so if the concern is that somehow an applicant might apply during the moratorium because we haven't named it properly, if that's the concern, I guess
No, I'm concerned that an applicant is going to put any kind of facility capturing anything out of the air. That's not what we were told this was going to be.
So,
we were told it was going to be carbon capture.
I guess, Natalie, let's just reiterate. The title of the section is air capture and concentration, right? That's the name we're talking about. So, can you reiterate why is it that we don't specifically refer to carbon in that title?
And we can change it to carbon or CO2 capture in terms. So we want to be thorough and cover so if you do it once, maybe something comes along, then you got to redo your code again. This is just a little more broad so that we
I guess, Natalie, but isn't it fair that this code is written specific to CO2? And we have references throughout.
Yeah.
So I guess I would support adding carbon to the title. I think it's.
And I wouldn't say carbon because carbon doesn't sit in the air. It's carbon dioxide.
Yeah, CO2.
Yeah.
Sure. The technology, I haven't heard anybody say carbon dioxide direct air capture, right? We're semantics here. We've all been calling it carbon capture.
But I'm just saying if we really are concerned about semantics, which is what this is, carbon dioxide is what is getting pulled from the air. It is definitely not carbon.
And that's fair. I guess my concern would be if somebody's looking at our code to find something that they're interested in, let's make sure that when they look at in a table of contents that they say, oh, that's what I'm looking for.
Yep.
And maybe air capture doesn't
cover
where carbon dioxide something or other, sure, or carbon capture as we've been calling it.
Yeah.
I guess I would see that and know what.
The only thing is we most definitely can't say that it's limited just out of the air because there is the possibility that compressed carbon dioxide will come from another location, come down our roads, impact our roads, and be sequestered in Morton County.
That is covered under the Industrial Commission under sequestration, isn't it?
No, we want to cover that too. And so that's why this is more broad and doesn't say just out of the air.
I believe you need a whole section on that if it's going to be coming from off-site, because our understanding is direct air capture is, I can give you pages of every company, government organization, what direct air capture is,
Mhm.
the on-site capture of direct air out of the atmosphere.
Right.
Now, if they're gonna say they're gonna bring it from another facility to sequester it in our backyard, that's completely different. I think that's something separate all.
And the only difference is really impacts to roads.
And
So,
the neighbors, because now you have a lot more CO2 being sequestered
Oh, for sure.
into our homes.
well, it would be similar amounts, it's just those amounts would have to come over a road. So we don't want to leave that open and not have that covered.
From that facility.
Sure.
So how is it accounted for in this code?
Property upon which a concentrated air sequestration well is to be located is subject to the standards of this section. So if you have a well, we can't regulate the well itself, but if you're gonna have a well and you bring carbon dioxide that's compressed from off-site to that well, the fact of bringing it to the well, we also wanna cover.
So now that we are covering that
This,
in
the
this
way I've
policy.
worded it, we are also covering that scenario. Because we don't wanna just leave that open, we also wanna cover that scenario.
And Mr. Chairman, Natalie, will I get this? The thing she's talking about is a specific process, the fans, whatever have you. And now we're expanding that to an adjacent process.
It's very, very
Yeah,
similar.
and I'm not sure I want to, it should be an adjacent process. I think we should keep it to the air, which is a specific process, and that's our original process idea was.
Mhm.
I don't know if we should deviate from it, but that's my opinion.
I think when it gets to county commission, that will be a concern, that it comes from off-site, the potential for it to come off-site. And we can keep discussing that, but I know that that is gonna be a concern. And it, oh,
Yeah, go
sorry.
ahead, Andy. Yep.
Question on the title of this draft, because that's kind of what we're talking about right now. Natalie, didn't you say the state's attorney's office requested that this title be this way?
They just said best to leave off the sequestration portion so that we don't somehow get ourselves into a situation where any entity would think we are regulating the actual sequestration because we can't.
Okay, so they never made an order about this title.
That advice was given over the phone, I believe.
I think then that the title needs to be clarified by the state's attorney's office since they're already involved.
And if it was an email, I'll find it. But I
Because
can't
we,
remember it.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Zachmeyer, we had sequestration in there before.
Mhm.
The title, it was in the title, and
We
they
changed
asked
it.
us to take it off.
Then there's probably a legal reason why they're asking it, and
It's because the sequestration is, we don't have any legal jurisdiction over the sequestration.
And we don't want to bring that back
that's
into the title.
Exactly,
Right,
exactly.
right.
but if it's about this title and what to include in the title, then that's gonna have to go through the state's attorney's office.
So
They were-
I don't think they didn't tell us they just wanted that word gone.
They just wanted that word
Yeah.
gone. That was
That's
the
all it
only
was.
direction, just that
Yeah.
word. So that's why it doesn't include that word. And we could say compression, concentration, whatever word we, and honestly, from a legal standpoint, I don't think that that is going to be the huge issue. It's very clear what we're trying to achieve here with all the detail that's in this. And it's not creating a whole separate use because the impacts are very similar in terms of the concern with the roads. That's the only detail that adds. Potentially, tanks on site. I mean, I doubt they're gonna have tanks on site. If they were gonna do that, they're gonna bring trucks and they're going to pump it into the ground. Your noise, you're gonna likely have less noise because you don't have fans, but it's still something that we want to regulate.
I just want you to know I'll still be arguing this at the next meeting because none of this makes sense and this isn't what we were told this was going to be.
And this has been in there for a month for everyone to see.
There's nothing in here about it sucking in CO2 from outside.
So-
I'm saying that's what's in the first paragraph.
So Natalie, the the concept of including off-site delivery of carbon is older than a month. Is that right?
That, yes.
I mean, I do recall, Don, that it was something that's been discussed at all of the subcommittee meetings.
Not all of them, one I was.
Yeah, no, I understand. Okay.
Yeah, it's been in there, it's been in there since the very beginning of the subcommittee.
Yeah, but I just want to make the point that it has been since the first, from what I recall.
Yes.
But in fairness, I'm not suggesting you've missed anything. The discussion has focused around direct air capture. Yeah. It was sort of a, byproduct, like we're covering that by virtue of covering the direct air capture, and it's really the roads portion that deals with that.
And this isn't some use that's trying to pull the wool over people's eyes. That's a less impactful in terms of on-site. If you are, it would be less impactful in terms of noise because you wouldn't have fans there. So that impact is gone. Literally the only impact would be to roads. And so
we could have both also. We could have a facility full of fans that are going 24/7, and it could also, in addition to that, have more trucks from another facility elsewhere buried.
In all likelihood, you're not gonna, if they're just trucking it in from elsewhere, they're not gonna bother to put fans up. It'd be a separate type of approach.
So I think, Natalie, based on the discussion, maybe as we look at some additions to this policy, maybe we do need to add some clarity somewhere in here about the expectations or the limitations to that use, so that we're making clear it isn't a steady stream of semis bringing concentrated carbon. I assume that's the concern.
Yeah, and I mean, that is theoretically what it could be. And the thing is, if we have nothing in our ordinance, they could just do it and we have nothing to say about it unless we have it in the ordinance. That could just be the industrial, because there would be no above ground portion. It would just be a wellhead.
Well, then it's not a direct air capture facility, it's a sequestration facility.
Right. And so we're just saying, if you're passing through over land and you have a route over land and you're eventually going to sequester it, that's what we're regulating. So
clarification on that language in the I think would be extremely helpful, like Jesse said. Expanding that and clarifying that.
So that's what's in the applicability. That is, so if it's a property upon which a concentrated air sequestration well is to be located, is subject to the standards of this section.
Right, so essentially we're saying even if you're not putting in a direct air capture facility, but you have a well that we don't have jurisdiction over because that's state regulated.
Right.
This policy would still apply in terms of the road and all the other impacts. So the intent was, I'm going to say, to benefit the residents in that particular use, because without this,
it would be a free for all.
We don't regulate the well, and we can't.
Your property.
Right, and we don't regulate the public roads. So this was our opportunity to say,
exactly,
if you're bringing it from elsewhere, this also applies. You have to abide by all of this.
Exactly.
And maybe we need to make it
only, not for anything they feel like burying there.
correct. This policy would be for CO2, concentrated CO2.
Right.
Yeah, and I think, Natalie, let's work on if we need to make sure that the applicability section is
carbon dioxide.
Explicit.
A lot of clarification there.
Any other thoughts from the board?
So by passing, Mr. Chairman, by passing the policy, we're not opening the doors to specifically allow anything, right?
This is just setting the expectations, standards, policy for how an applicant would apply the materials they need in order to apply, the timing, and then the standards for how the use would operate.
Okay, so they meet all the standards, and then you say, okay, I met this standard, now you have to give it to me.
It still comes to this board for an evaluation.
But, I mean, it still can be refused by us.
Yes.
Okay.
Or by a county commission, yes.
Yeah.
If they're not.
They're not making a open door.
Right.
Arrangement with them.
It's not an
That's what I'm saying.
automatic approval, correct?
Yeah. because I looked at this open air carbon capture, this is kind of a bad example, but why not put a bunch of sponges up on towers to take the humidity out of the air?
Yeah, well, right, seriously, yeah.
I mean,
We're
and
gonna catch a bunch of butterflies, we're gonna-
I just researched too, and the science is, I think science looks at a lot of now. We see that with the battery cars, that now sounds good, but now, oh yeah, we got $30,000 to replace a battery. Oh, we don't know what to do with these batteries. We got these windmills, we can't dispose of the blades anymore because they're not disposable. But you have to look beyond the now, and I think science sometimes doesn't always do that. And science, what is science? Science is trying to figure out what science is. So that's what I was told, as somebody that knew about science anyway. But anyway, that's my comments.
Anything else from the board? And Natalie, with the comments tonight, what are we looking for?
The change to say carbon dioxide, maybe direct air capture and concentration, and then I'll have to come up with some wording for overland transport of concentrated carbon dioxide. We'll come up with something for that.
And then you'll be waiting for some feedback on their
Yes.
static setback
Yep,
or
I'm gonna wait for feedback, and hopefully everyone will send me their ideas about preferences for static setback. And then like a just put in, there's gonna be a third-party review. Maybe there's a fee for that, depending on the RFP or whatever.
I think, yeah, I don't know, depending on the timeline of the next steps for this, it probably merits some discussion on what the best way to incorporate
I think
that
that
is.
once we get some feedback from everybody, we should have another subcommittee meeting. Yeah, for sure.
Yep. So from this board tonight, you were looking for feedback, and there's no approval, no.
Right, we would definitely not approve this after
No.
one hearing anyway.
Right.
So.
Just making it clear that.
Yes, yep. And so, yeah, the title change, the third-party validation of noise and plume analysis.
I have the reassessing of the bond.
We can talk about that.
At the meeting.
Let's ensure that 200%
Is the correct
Yeah.
number.
a logical
For
number.
That's a note I just
Yeah.
made here.
Yes. Yeah, so those are the changes that I have. And then again, waiting for feedback on static setback.
So, and I guess last thing I have, Natalie, just to ensure that we're covering everything that was discussed. Lacey had a comment about enforceable road restrictions. If we have another meeting, let's just, I guess, make sure that that we're good with how we have that.
Mhm.
Okay, anything else from the board? Natalie, are you good?
I'm good.
Okay. Take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Motion and a second. We're adjourned. Thanks, everybody.